Hello YouTube! After the morning's heaviness, I thought I'd do something a wee bit lighter this evening. This is Universe Classics Overkill, and he's a bit of an odd one really. He's a recolour, a repaint, contentious in and of itself, I know, of the Universe Classics Grimlock mould. And the Grimlock mould is one of those unusual ones in that it's not a reflection of how the character appeared in the Generation 1 continuity, as most of the Universe Classics are. In fact, this guy more closely resembles Grimlock's Pretender incarnation that came about in the latter days of Generation 1. It was part of a series called the Classic Pretenders. I think there were 4 classic Transformers: Grimlock, Bumblebee, Jazz and Starscream, Decepticons outnumbered as per usual, who were recreated as Pretenders, and they were pretty dire by all accounts. And what makes it even more weird is that they've chose to recolour it into one of the most obscure of obscure Transformers. Overkill was originally a Decepticon. He was one of Soundwave's cassettes, and he came about in the latter days of Generation 1, around 1987-88. And there's really not much you can say about him. He hardly featured in any continuity at all. He makes one appearance, I believe, in Call of the Primitives, where you see him flying out of Soundwave's chest, along with his partner Slugfest. They weren't bad toys, actually. They're really quite clever little cassettes. But as recolours go, this is actually not bad. I say it's not bad because the mould is quite apposite for the character, and that's really my acid test for repaints. If the mould is appropriate to the character, then I don't really mind that much, and this one certainly is. Now, Overkill is an idiot. An absolute moron. He is one of the stupidest Decepticons ever. Unfortunately, he's also very garrulous. He likes to talk a lot, usually about what he's going to rip apart and what he's going to destroy and what he's going to do to this Autobot and what he's going to do to that Autobot and rah 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 rah. Unfortunately, he's one of the Decepticons who really can't collect. He is not terribly competent, nor is he the most skilled warrior or the strongest amongst them. So he usually ends up with his faceplate beaten in. Now, as for the toy itself, it's actually a very successful mould in and of itself. The dinosaur mode is beautifully coherent. There is hardly any suggestion at all of the robot mode. And there are also sculpted details on it aplenty. The hide is just full of detail, which is very, very nice. It's also a much more accurate Tyrannosaurus Rex than Generation 1 Grimlock ever was. Generation 1 Grimlock had a problem whereby he was sort of upright and his tail dragged along the floor, and T-Rex's didn't do that. This is actually much more accurate, with the body sort of slung forward, the head thrust out and the tail thrust out to balance. It's very, very beautifully proportioned as well. The head sculpt is fabulous. He's got these wonderful, huge legs, and his articulation is excellent in this mode, truly excellent. His head will go up and down, although it's very stiff. His mouth will open and close. His arms are on ball joints, much use that they are. And his legs have multiple points of articulation. He also has a very, very wonderful tail. The tail is actually, like Pretender Grimlock, is a weapon that he can hold in robot mode, and it is multiple jointed. It is just composed of hinges, which is lovely. It's very, very nice indeed. I also like the fact that you can stick the gun on the back, so he actually has a long-range weapon in dinosaur mode. Yes, that is undoubtedly a very, very successful mould indeed. Now, the transformation is really ingenious. It's very well conceived, but I would say that it's overcomplicated for the figure. It takes a while to figure out, and it doesn't really need to be, considering that it's really only a deluxe class. It doesn't really need to be that complicated. And there we have Universe Classics Overkill in his robot mode. Now, one fault that does become apparent whilst just transforming it is that the legs are so tightly knitted together by these little pins and slots that it requires actually breaking them apart, pulling them off at the ball joint in order to transform them. Which is a little annoying, to be quite honest. These pins look rather fragile, and it does seem that they might break, which would be very, very annoying. Now, the robot itself, like the dinosaur, is wonderfully coherent. There is very, very little indication of its alternate mode, and what kibble there is, like these claws on his arms here, and of course the visible halves of the dinosaur head on his feet, actually add to the overall look of it, so the kibble really doesn't concern me at all. There are a couple of design issues with this guy in robot mode. Because of the way the arm hinges work, they don't stay in place. There's nothing to lock them in place, so they just flip out like that very easily, which is slightly annoying. And they also, owing to the nature of the transformation, they flip out in opposite ways, which is odd. It does have, of course, the standard firing missile weapon, but, you know, it's kind of cool looking. I mean, it has this bayonet thing going on. Again, very much like Pretender Grimlock, which seems to have been the inspiration for this mould. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I think I might just disable the firing mechanism. He's also had this little spark crystal affair here altered so that it has a Decepticon symbol as opposed to an Autobot one, which is nice. But structurally, it remains exactly the same as Classics Grimlock. The only difference is the colour scheme. But it's such a drastically different colour scheme. They actually do look quite distinct when you put them side by side, which is kind of cool. That's the mark of a rather successful repaint, I think. He also has this interesting weapon, which is his tail, which becomes a sort of whip club thing, which is very, very cool indeed. A bludgeoning weapon, which suits the character right down to the ground. He's a bit of a brute, this one. He also has a certain amount of back kibble, which is unfortunate, but, you know, the overall robot is very coherent. It's a very nice design. He looks very, very cool in either mode. So, yes, I can certainly forgive whatever faults he does have. Not quite as sexy as Dragstrip, but then I ask you, what is? Barring perhaps the is it Energon Mirage. Now, I'm not sure I'd recommend this if you've already got Classics Grimlock. I mean, it all depends really on where your sympathies lie. If, like me, you are a Decepticon fanboy, then by all means it's definitely worth picking up. And this is the only other version of Overkill there has ever been since Generation 1, so it's nice to see an evolution of the character. And according to the box blurb, he is a direct evolution of Generation 1 Overkill. There's a wee bit of blurb about how he transplants his spark into a new upgraded body to escape his bondage to Soundwave, which is it's a nice bit of development for the character, I suppose. He also has rather fearsome light piping in his head, which works very, very well. Like Grimlock, he has this one-piece visor, and the light shines through there beautifully. Yes, if you can find him for cheap, I definitely recommend picking him up. He's a very, very nice piece of work, this one.